I was born in Visaginas. It was back in the day when it was Sniečkus. Our power plant was closed not because of the plan, like it was supposed to be. It was kind of forced onto people, and probably this was the main reason why people were not maybe fully prepared for this change, and it was kind of brought by the politics. This essentially meant that certain things were kind of dealt with in a rush, sometimes not really thinking about consequences. It was sometimes difficult to talk about decommissioning because for some of them, they felt that it was a wrong decision. And for some people who were the older workers, it was like their life. Everything they've put all their energy into building this, and now they have to disassemble all of that. Yeah, you can imagine it's like building your house and then having to tear it apart. In Soviet times, when people were coming here, they were in my age now, and they came to a town which was just building, and they were all young. They were all young families all around. There were no older people, and they felt this as I can't even express it really. It was like a massive construction, and they were all happy. They had a lot of like-minded people. They made friends. They were going out. Streets were full of people, kids. It was like a happy place to be in, and we see a different reality.
I am a communications specialist at the Ignalina nuclear power plant. A mom of two and happy person. My uncle came here first, and he was participating in constructions, and in 1991, when the independence is going to come to Lithuania, I was 4 when they decided to come and work, live and stay in Sniečkus. All my grandparents from my dad's side are Polish. My mom, she is Belarusian. You have such a mixture, and then you need to understand actually who you really are when you find yourself in Lithuania.
My mother was working at the plant and father too, but now father is passed away. My mother is retired, so actually I am the only one now who is related to the industry.
В среднем 54% грузовиков. Рассуждения о потенциальной реакции российского правительства в случае, если Украина причастна к совершению терактов в Крокус-Сити-Холле, неуместны. Об этом ТАСС заявил пресс-секретарь президента РФ Дмитрий Песков. Идет следствие.
This construction is also, I say, related to life cycle of people too, because all of people came here, they were young. And basically they raised their kids here, most of them worked here, some of them already passed away, somebody now are retired and still live here or probably moved to the people live their life, and nuclear power plant does too.
When our parents were young, they had like all the certainty they could have. There were not many problems for them.
My dad, he moved from Russia. He was born there. There is a city called Kaluga. And yeah, went to study to Moscow and then came here as an engineer to build the town. He was working, he was building actually the power plant and some sort of infrastructure around the town. My mom, she was born in the north part of Russia, in the Vorkuta. Once she was a little girl, her parents were coming to Lithuania, and actually they were leaving her for quite long periods for grandmother. So she was speaking Lithuanian. Only the father was able to speak because the mother was speaking Russian. When they were meeting each other, mom and daughter, they were not able to communicate. I always think about that our parents who came over here to build town, to build the nuclear power plant, they were building that not only for them, they were building that for us, for their kids, for the next generations, for grandchildren. When you build it, it's not short-term project, it's a long-term project. We have so many engineers, so many specialists, nobody listens to them. It's just a decision, and then it's not yours anymore. What happened? They have to stop it, they have to demolish everything. That's nonsense, complete nonsense.
Не то что недовольны, они как бы даже обескуражены скорее, что нормальная, здоровая атомная станция, полна сил, еще могла бы работать, и третий блок можно было открыть, да, то есть мы могли еще свою энергию продуцировать, и вдруг раз, и закрыли это все, то есть... Вот, а все-таки мы приехали сюда, да, строить город атомщиков. Все это так было 43 тысячи или сколько там у нас, да, под 40 тысяч точно у нас, 38-40. Все это. Это с детством связано, конечно. Я была ребенком, все было здорово, весело. А сейчас уже взрослые понимают, что нету станции, все. Дочь хочет связать свою жизнь с конным спортом, то есть она хочет быть тренером и участвовать в соревнованиях. В Литве на данном этапе есть несколько школ, но опять же они такие, как сказать, не очень хорошие, не настолько хороши, как хотелось бы. Вот. И она, к сожалению, настроена. После 12 класса, вот еще годик, вот этот и следующий, будет искать где-то место, куда можно будет поехать и получить знания касательно вот тренерства. Но я бы очень хотела остаться здесь и никуда не выезжать.
When I was a kid, I never saw that power plant, but I just was imagining the bus is coming, you're playing, and see the bus is coming, he's taking your dad, like nobody's there, just everywhere kids and ladies. And then like 4 o'clock, bus and dad. When one day it's hot and it's getting colder and colder at home, and more conversations about worries, and you hear just parents and all adults talking about the prices and what's going to happen to us. And then again, there was a big problem and trouble with work. That was a stage really hard to accept that you need to search for someone else.
People want to see what we as human beings can actually build. What brain you must have to be able to actually invent a thing like that. And when they see how much thought was put in place and how it was all designed, they get inspired maybe by how much human beings can actually do. We invented this, we built this, but what if something goes wrong? And this is where Chernobyl comes. Things did go wrong. And for people, when they come to the Ignalina nuclear power plant, I guess for them it's quite interesting to see the differences as well, and maybe believe in us one more time when they think that, okay, yeah, things happened in Chernobyl, bad things, but we learned from that.
А так многие, конечно, уехали, многие расстроились, некоторые даже алкоголь стали употреблять, то есть лишились работы, лишились семьи. То есть есть и такие случаи, конечно.
They need to believe in what they're doing. They need to feel some purpose. Purpose was lost.
Уже мертвого объекта, да, немножко еще позаработать, и некоторые говорят, пока работа есть, и хорошо. То есть глубоко не идут в этот вопрос. Потому что все это грустно, печально, это, скажем так, наше детище, да, строили наши бабушки, дедушки, родители, и это все просто взяли и закрыли. В самом соку все это было, в самый рассвет.
It was the first working day of the year, like the 2nd of January. So it was already like 1.5 day of shutdown. And definitely one could really observe this, silence. Turbine hall started to chill. Then it's already, really sad feeling. That you feel that somebody is dead. It's like you came to somebody, to some of your friends or relatives, to the house, to say goodbye to a person who passed. It was like that. It was like that.
It should happen in normal kind of conditions, that the power plant should have enough to decommission and dismantle everything on its own. But because we didn't have that fund, if we waited for 50 years, there is no certainty we would get money, because it was one of the requirements for entering the European Union. There was agreement that they're going to finance it now.
No power plant constructed from that time has any decommission plan or manuals just how to decommission the installation, because such requirements came, I would say, not long ago.
To me, it's a pity that it's been dismantled, even though it's not yet known how to really do it properly. You know what I mean? When they say they need to dismantle the reactor itself, and they have no idea how they're going to do it, even now. Also, there was this thought that some people who were building the power plant, they might still be able to know and plan what's going to happen if we take these things apart, because their knowledge is the living knowledge, we still have it.
I saw the dismantling of all the hearts of nuclear power plant. I saw the dismantling of turbines. So I saw them alive, and then I saw how they were dismantled. And obviously reactor is the heart, right? So this is something that is the last, like the human body. So the heart is the last who is going to stop beating. At this point, I felt like something in me is already ended.
I think as long as we have the guys who build it, who turned on the reactors, as long as they are here, as long as they are alive, I think everything definitely still lives. On a quiet winter day, when I look at it, I can still hear it. You can still hear it.